Okay, Constellation training, fourth weekend, December 8th, 9th, Sunday morning, session 1.
2018.
Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody. I know Katerina, obviously, I only just finished uploading the videos this morning, and even if she had time to watch them, she probably wouldn't have had time to watch them. So Katerina's a little bit behind. I'll probably do a little bit of catchy-uppy kind of stuff. But just how are people today? I think yesterday started out a little slow and funny. And then as we did some constellations in the afternoon, the group kind of cohered a little bit better. Felt like people left on a good, if very tired note. We missed you. We very much missed you and your presence. When one person's not here, the room feels like, really small. But we did get 3 people also in the afternoon, which changes the energy in the room tremendously. It really helps to have a few more bodies. So how are people this morning? How are you feeling? Constellation questions on your mind, or just particularly we would like to hear how you're doing because we didn't get to hear your check-in yesterday. Why don't you just start out? Where'd you come from? What took you away yesterday?
Here. I was in Los Angeles yesterday. I came home really late. It was like, I think, 3 a.m. this morning.
Oh, God.
So,
thank you for being here. Same thing with Lily 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Two
I'm
months
tired. I'm a little stretched thin because in my profession, December and January is always the craziest months, end of year. So I work a lot more hours than I usually do. Otherwise, I'm in a good spirit. In regards to Constellation, I had a lot of ripple effects after my last theme. And it's intense. I still feel like for example, now approaching Christmas, I did a few things to honor my Jewish ancestors. I ordered a menorah instead of in combination with the Christmas lighting. And I notice every time I go there and do something, it's still very emotional. It's still very. So to me, when I'm busy with my daily things, I don't really notice, I realize. But whenever I slow down and focus on it or occupy myself with this goes like. So, but I don't mind it. I like it. I like that it's up and in my presence.
Excellent. Any constellation questions on your mind? Or?
No. I think I need to slowly come back into the groove.
Okay. What do we make life simple? How you doing, Lily?
I think yesterday's healing, and then something about the soul retrieval thing. I think because I was the traumatic event, and I almost fell down several times holding it. I went home and I just slept. I just fell down and slept immediately for hours. I had some weird dreams too.
I did too, by the way.
Really, it was just I had just some weird dreams. And I was just some of them were a little creepy. And I always look up the dream meanings and stuff like that. So I was oh, this is about to heal, which I thought was going to be so trivial, because it's not a dangerous topic. And then it ended up being a lot of, so I feel like it was heavy processing.
Lily had a constellation.
On career stuff. And I was oh, it's so innocuous. It'll be fine. And
it's always famous last words on any topic.
So I actually felt more process heavy on that one than after a lot of other ones. So I was just whoa. And then I woke up really early this morning, but I felt very efficient when I woke up. I was just suddenly I was okay, this is, I was looking at all these things I'm going to do to make money in Thailand. It's all those things. And I suddenly felt like it unblocked a lot of stuff that I probably could have looked at like years ago around like issues of like money and like business and things like that. But then I also felt like now I feel like I'm in this like mode of like almost irritable, like very focused on that. And I'm like, so yeah, it's like just kind of like a raw, heavy, focused on efficiency and not feeling as patient. Yeah.
Yes, and Constellation learning is nothing if not inefficient. You have to kind of get in the muck around. So yes, I appreciate that contrast. Yeah. Okay. Jeff, sir, after facilitating yesterday?
Not too much to report. A little tired. I'm not naturally a morning person, so getting up early to get up here is kind of a pain in the ass. But not much.
Any Constellation questions on your mind? You often have very juicy Constellation questions.
No, I just feel like I did learn a lot, a number of useful things from yesterday. I'll try to keep them in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Me too.
Sure. Processing, yes, last night, exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Would you just briefly share with Katerina just the thing that we finally just looked at, just so she can be in on it?
Yeah.
You don't have to describe the whole process, just this annual event that's up for you.
Yeah. Last month has been, November is a very heavy month for me because my husband passed away on the 12th, and his birthday is on the 27th. And now, all the festivities of the end of the year comes up. So I've been very sad. And for like a year and a half, I was like numb. I was just doing things. And I would cry, of course, but like from a year and a half to now, it's been very heavy. I've been really, really crying and really processing his loss, And I didn't realize that it was going to be this far, in 3 years from his departure, and I am deshecha. I don't know how you say that. So it's been hard. So we did. Leslie did a very good exercise yesterday with me because I left something in that process. I left something, my strength in I don't know how to explain it, actually.
You don't need to. No, I was just wanted to make sure she was in on the fact that you've been grieving your husband.
Yeah.
That's basically it. I mean, obviously, if someone's not here for a Constellation process, we can't get them up to date on the ins and outs of that. That's just impossible, and we have no expectations around that. That's part of you and your dignity as the person who receives the Constellation. But just so that, Katrina is up on the latest sort of what's up in the circle. For me, I'm fine. The alarm went off at 6:30 this morning, and usually I'm sort of getting wakeful at that hour, and it roused me out of the middle of a deep dream that I was nowhere near done and that I was quite enjoying, and I'm still cranky about it. I mean, I had a series of very vivid, kind of fun dreams like aliens were out to get us and we were a resistance band. And,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, as opposed to those other dreams we have from time to time where you're like, oh, that was horrible. So, and I was like out when that alarm went off. And that's really, by 6:30, my body's usually feeling wakeful and ready to get going. So there's a little bit of my spirit which is going, hey, who kicked me out of bed this morning? But I did have time to go to the farmer's market this morning and get some fresh fruit and vegetables, which is something that is dear to me, getting to the farmer's market every weekend and getting fresh fruit and vegetables. So I don't always make time for that on these weekends. So I'm glad I did. It's good to see you all. So what I want to start out with is just a tiny bit of review, and then do the rest of the lecture on the topic of this weekend, which is trauma and attachment stuff. The first thing I just want to review, just because the first weekend was a long time ago, right? And this is such core material, and we don't necessarily refer to it until we need to refer to it. But this is a little bit of a test. Ha. Who can name well, first of all, who can define an order of love?
Loyalty,
Nope.
belonging.
That's one of the orders of love.
Okay, fine.
But when we say, you know, Hellinger has these orders of love, what do we mean by the orders of love? What's your definition of it?
They're like the rules that they're like the invisible rules that have to be obeyed between generations and within like a system of people who are born from other people in the system.
Perfect. Orders of love are rules, guidelines, patterns, rhythms, whichever word you like best, that healthy systems tend to obey. Okay? We call them orders of love because our founder is German. And the word Ordnung, right? Yeah. But really, some people really react to that word orders, which I understand, so they'll use patterns or rhythms, of love. The thing I want to just remind us all, that in this context, we can usually, like in parentheses, in families. The orders of love vary between different kinds of systems. So organizational systems have slightly different orders of love. Natural ecological systems have slightly different orders of love. Yeah. In the natural world, it is not a trespass for the lion to eat the gazelle. And the human system, that would be a violation of the orders of love, right? And the reason why I say this is that these are the ones we focus in on because we are family constellations. And it's just, if you want to start working with other kinds of systems, and sometimes if you have clients, eventually they're going to bring to you a business problem. It's just kind of inevitable. You need to know more about the orders in that system to do a good job, right? There's actually some history until a guy by the name of Gunther Weber first started to develop organizational constellations work. Now there's a lot of people who do it. Bert Hellinger's people would go into businesses and start applying these orders of love and treat businesses like families and really fuck shit up. Right? I mean, really mess stuff up. Okay, so what's they are in no order, but there is one that kind of almost contains all the others, but just shout out an order of love. You mentioned belonging. And what specifically about belonging? What's I'm sorry, Katerina?
trying to understand the question. What do you mean? What specifically?
Belonging is just a word. What about belonging is important in family systems?
That every member has its place.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone who should belong does belong. If you're born into a family, you belong. Now, one of the things like we were talking, this was in a different moment, not yesterday. There are other ways to belong to each other, right? For instance, you get married, you belong to each other. Your combat buddies in war belong to each other. Murderers and murdered belong to each other. So there are other ways to really belong to each other. Business partners have a certain belonging with each other, et cetera, et cetera. But in families, at the very least, the whole thing around, if you're born into a family, you belong. Doesn't matter if you get suicided out, adopted out, written out of the will out, you move off to Morocco and say, screw them, you can't. Yeah. Okay, what's another one?
The newer generations are the small ones.
Right, so there's seniority. That's the there is an order around seniority in systems.
Honoring the
Yeah.
reality.
I'll get to that. That is the next one. But seniority is just the notion that it's mostly related to date. The ones born earlier are senior to the ones who are born later. This is often misunderstood in a lot of ways. Mostly we just understand that the ones come first more or less give life to the ones who come next. Yeah? It usually correlates to decision-making and authority. But there are exceptions to this. Like if your mom gets cancer, but your younger brother is an oncologist, right? You're gonna not leave all the decision making to the mom. You're gonna go to the brother who has some knowledge and say, do you have some recommendations about what mom ought to do, right? If a parent is destitute for various reasons, and there's a child who's really super abundant with money, it might make sense for that child to share some of those funds with a parent. Yeah. Okay. Yours was
Honoring the reality.
honoring reality, or what is. Yeah. That I consider kind of the umbrella thing. From that one, all these others kind of flow to a certain degree. But it's just, it's that thing when we look at the war dead and we say it's sad. There were so many. Yeah. Okay. By the way, remember this is not a formal list. Bert Hellinger never categorized this. People who followed did. That's why you'll see different lists. These 5 to me are sort of fundamental. What are a couple more?
Balance of giving and taking.
Balance of giving and taking. Very important when it comes to work life, romantic life, and to a certain degree in families, like if one sibling is doing all the work to help out the parent and someone isn't, that sort of thing. This drives systems nuts, this imbalance in the giving and taking. It's interesting. Oh, I was just listening as I was driving this morning, that very interesting long form report being done on the experience of well, I think the overall program was on helping and receiving help and what that's like. And the specific thing was on disabled people and when they like the help and when they find it patronizing. Very, very interesting topic. But basically the whole thing was about giving and taking and how it makes us feel. Disabled people feeling like, oh, I have nothing to give anymore. And you're trying to force giving on me when I don't need it. all that. So it shows up in all kinds of places in life. And I was thinking this morning, that's an order of love on the balance of giving and taking. And the last one?
Taking responsibility.
Yes. This is mostly related to transgressions or violations. But the one taking the responsibility, and then I always just put in parentheses without revenge, right? Because when we force someone to take responsibility in a vengeful way or an over out of scale kind of way, that has a similar effect, right, on the system. It doesn't work, right? But this goes to our conversation yesterday. The use I've seen in some circles of constellations being, it's true, we're not supposed to judge. We're supposed to understand everything's systemic. And if anyone made any violations, it was probably in the context of a larger system that they had very little choice about, all that sort of stuff, which removes all the blame. But Bert Hellinger is so strong on this, but they still have responsibility for the consequences, and it belongs with them. It gives us dignity. Yeah, I murdered my brother. I couldn't do anything different from that, right? It's something that is sometimes implied by some of this stuff, but no, it gives me dignity to say, I might not have been able to choose much differently, but I take responsibility for that. Leave the consequences with me. Feels really good. Because part of the reason is if we have parents who don't take responsibility for their violations, who will do it?
The kids.
The kids. The kids will unconsciously be willing to take responsibility. Okay, so thank you. The reason why I just want to come back to this is a really useful diagnostic. When you're interviewing your client, for instance, Jeff, as you were interviewing Lily yesterday, now that you think back on it a little bit, do any of these seem relevant?
Probably belonging and taking responsibility.
And give me a specific, for instance.
Well, taking responsibility for finding our own path as opposed to I suppose increasing belonging by feeling like she had to honor her dad's wishes.
Yeah. And if we can presuppose that no matter what path she takes, even if it's a terrible path, and by some definition, she still belongs to her family no matter what. Like there's no losing belonging, right? That lets us all off the hook a little bit about having to be a certain way in order to belong. And then it gives her the dignity of being able to take responsibility for her own human adult experience. Yeah? And there's a lot of other things in there too, but yep, that's a good example. Yeah. Okay. So you can be listening to someone and just sort of noticing what are the pieces that seem to be out of balance. Okay. I just wanted to review that. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to review yesterday just a bit, partly for Katerina, and it's not going to be conclusive or full. There's no way I can do that. Oh, that's how we ended last weekend. To be alive is to be guilty. Yay! Okay, this is where we started out with. So I basically did a bunch of information on trauma. You're going to just have to...
Can I take a picture of this?
Sure. You're going to have to just listen to the video. But that basically that we look at trauma partly because it's in the air. Everyone's talking about trauma, and your clients are going to come to you and say, I'm dealing with a trauma. In the bread and butter of the things that we deal with, depression or relationship issues or whatever, is usually a trauma at its back. And then talking a bit about what is trauma, a bad event that overwhelmed, that was unaccompanied, that got a stuck meaning. Okay, that trauma can be both personal and collective. I talked about this access, that on one end we can be so fearful on behalf of the client that we can barely do anything with them. Yeah, feel free to just get up and take pictures. And we're too solicitous, too careful, too not allowing them to have an experience. Over here, the notion that, we can do no damage, that clients are, going to have their own process no matter what. And my recommendation is that we're somewhere in the middle of that access of both having care for the client's fragility, but also recognizing that we need to leave a lot of responsibility for their process to them. Somewhere in the middle. That we want to work with trauma in a safe enough way. Moving on a bit more with what trauma is, that it by definition, it wasn't integrated or honored or included or completed or seen. There's a lot of different ways that we can talk about that. And that because that's the case, it's showing up in the client system in some way, a repeating of the trauma. And that's what trauma does. In an attempt to complete, it repeats, which keeps it going. Then we moved into attachment theory, some important people in attachment theory, different ways you can experience that. And that in Constellation's work, this is the phrase that's often used to talk about attachment stuff, the interrupted reach, the way in which the baby automatically and biologically reaches for the breast. The child learns to repress or limit that movement, or in a sense, gives up because they're tired of getting their heart broken, in a sense. But that in a healthy situation, the reach for the parents and for the ancestors translates into a reach for life, which is relationships and fun and thriving and health and work and money and stuff like that. Okay. And then I talked a little bit about, and this is a good segue because I want to get into practical implications for constellations, which is that basically, so there's you, they're your parents, they're your grandparents, they're the rest of the ancestors. There's a trauma back here, okay, that affects you. Do you start with the bond between you and the parents, because after all, it's primary, it's first, it's the most immediate thing? Or do you start with the trauma back here and work your way forward back to the client? There are people who strongly really feel that if you don't address the bond between the client and the parents, there's really no point to doing anything else. It's so fundamental. Others, like Dan Booth Cohen, who's on a different page, and myself, are more convinced that we want to actually work things the other way around. It's actually work with the ancestral traumas, which make the closer relatives more whole and more resolved, and so that by the time we get to the parents and the client, the parents, their representations are feeling safer to the client. So now the client can actually make an easier connection rather than having to fight through all of this danger that they feel with the parent. And just between you and me, I've seen these constellations that Mark does. They are really painful for me to watch because I see the client, with the mother or whatever it is, and they're getting all their flight is just kicking up really hard. And everything is about that relationship. And sometimes, they find the sentence or the insight or the thing that helps the movement to happen, and that's really sweet. but so often I just see the clients struggle like for minutes to hours with their fight flight. And what are they going to do with all of those hormones when they get home that have gotten kicked up so intensely? Because when we're talking about fight flight, we're talking cortisol and adrenaline. We're talking about the adrenal glands. We're talking about a biological experience that your body gets kind of soaked in for a while, which is part of what I want to talk with you about today. Because particularly with people with serious trauma patterns, but not only them, you can't eliminate the presence of these fight flight hormones. It's like they're coming to you for help. Part of them is saying yes to having some of that happen, right? But you don't want them to soak too much in that, because that ends up requiring physiological recovery later on. Okay, so this is why and there are exceptions to everything. You've all seen me just do direct work with, last night we had very nice work between Lily and her dad, and it didn't seem in that particular, not like if we had brought in some earlier traumas that had led to her dad's experience, that would have been wrong. It wouldn't have been wrong. But what unfolded seemed like kind of ready to happen, right? So, I please don't misunderstand me here. Just a sort of a general theory when you're dealing with trauma, I often find that starting here and moving this way is actually, and you will even see me with like brand new clients, the parents won't get represented at all. And really just about the client having a nice experience of their ancestors once we've got some of their experience resolved. It's a good first step to really be able to feel safe and good with your ancestors. Okay. This is something you're going to have to watch the video on. And we're going to do some more work with this today. But this is one format, Sarah Payton's format that we worked with. We did that with Maria Elena. This is a way to work with, this part, basically, the repeating of the trauma piece. But she uses this really nice ritual language, which really, instead of just dealing with it in sort of blunt scientific language, using kind of ritual language actually is ritual and symbol and metaphor are very healing to the human spirit. Okay. And then that's just this was actually part of our conversation after the Constellation. You'll have to watch that as well. This won't make any sense on its own. That's just me scrolling. And then this is the second format, which we'll also work with today, which is this is a scarf. This is keeping the client safe as it deals with a traumatic event. Okay. Okay, so today. So what I basically sort of teed up here then is that as constellators, there's a certain fiduciary responsibility, as we put it. Do people know that word, fiduciary? I kind of understand the gestalt of it. It's harder to actually define. It's not merely your legal responsibility. It's something kind of larger than that. It's a sense of when you get into a contract, as an engineer, right? What are my obligations now that I've teed up, now that there's a contract between me and a client around this engineering project? Doing due diligence, doing my environmental reviews, providing a reliable design that isn't just fantasy, getting feedback from the client, all those sorts of things go into it. So we have a set of sort of fiduciary responsibilities, or what you've heard me talk about a lot as just being professional about what we do. Which is not about being perfect, and it's not about, I actually don't advocate for a movement towards certification in this field. I think there are ways in which, again, that's another spectrum. There's like loosey-goosey, anybody does anything with anyone sort of thing. And over here is lockdown, like therapists and the process they have to go through in order to get licensed. I think both of these ends are not very healthy models, and somewhere in the middle. But it means that when we don't have a licensing body, and it's kind of up to us to be aware of, like just yesterday, I reached out to one of my mentors for something I'm realizing I've got a growing edge on, right? So dealing with trauma is one of those bits, and to recognize our limits and work within them. So I've already talked about the axis in terms of, some responsibility for keeping clients safe, and also leaving clients the responsibility for their own healing process. But there are some basics, and I want to start out with sort of before the work. Even before you see a client or have an interaction with a client, there's some things that really help keep the work, as I've talked before in the Zoom meeting last time, about creating a really good container, a container with a beginning and a middle and an end, with a sense that and again, for those of you who were not there for that lecture, didn't hear it, please go back to that lecture. It's really, I've said before, 50% of good constellating is about understanding constellations, and the other 50% is skillful group management, right? Which is not about constellations work itself. Yeah. I mean, that little bit about, knowing to inform the person about the ritual, that's not a constellation skill. That's just a group management thing, right? Letting people know what the procedures are and what their role is and what you're expecting of them, and giving them some authority, but not too much authority, that sort of stuff. So all of that is, creating a container. And I'm a little nervous about this language because people say you need a container, and it's just wishy-washy language. It's like the other one is holding space. It's like, what does that mean, right? You have a sort of a bit of a gestalt sense about what it means, but how is it actionable? And creating a container is everything I just said. Having a good room, it's having the temperature right, it's having a beginning, middle, and an end, people knowing what their roles are, all that stuff. I talked about that last time. That's what creates a good container. And we all know a container that's too pinchy and tight, and people kind of can't breathe in it, and one that's like doesn't have enough boundary on it, right? It also really helps, and this is very tricky, when you don't have just one group with a committed group of people for a long period of time, but having some agreed culture, sense of what we're up to here. There are therapeutic modalities or alternative healing environments where there's a bit of a free-for-all quality in terms of, sort of a, free love, no flat organizational structure. Anybody can sort of have authority, emote whenever you want to emote, that kind of thing. As long as you have a shared culture that acknowledges that, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. You might not want to be doing trauma work in the middle of that, but it's not fundamentally wrong, right? But it's important that everyone in the group acknowledges and says yes to it, right? So having a culture where everyone's kind of more or less agreed about what we're up to here, yeah? And I call that kind of an adult, self-responsible space. This is something that I'm really into, and I've clarified my directions in my constellations groups about this over the years. I say specifically, to all the people who are going to be representatives. So I'm going to invite you to take care of yourself tonight. If you need to stand up and stretch your lower back behind your chair, please do that. If you end up in a roll on your knees and you have bad knees, please, let's find another position, that sort of thing. And then I say, my attention is quite appropriately mostly on the clients and the main activity in the middle of the room. So if you have needs, I'm going to sort of ask you to make sure you stay in touch with them and take care of them while respecting the group process, right? So inviting people into this, right? So that we're co-creating this together under my leadership. Culture can go really, really difficult when, for instance, you name it as such a therapeutic space that everyone identifies as someone super needy. And then you've got 10 really, really needy people in the room who are very focused on themselves and their needs and don't have a lot of bandwidth for noticing the group space and what it needs and what it's agreed to be part of. And also that perhaps there's some needs that we can meet ourselves as we're going along. Like, can I calm? I'm feeling too overexcited. Can I calm myself down, right? Or I'm feeling physically uncomfortable. Can I meet my physical comfort needs? Or, there's an interaction going on over there that I don't like, that I don't approve of, that is not my thing, but I'm not in charge. Can I get myself okay over here even as I recognize that's not my thing, right? Things like that. And balancing sort of, individual needs, because we don't want people to repress their needs and only bow to the group mind, right? And we don't want people only so focused on their personal needs that they can suddenly, and I've dealt with this, suddenly have an outburst that really freaks out the group. And it makes all the functioning there on out very, very difficult. Yeah. And to the point where maybe during the break, I need to say, this is perhaps not your thing. In group, you need people who can play with groups at a minimal way, right? So creating a culture where you really, but again, you want people on their knees for an hour who have bad knees. You don't want them to be that compliant, right? So, and like yesterday again, we want a representative to feel empowered enough on their own to say, hey, Jeff, I think I have something that might help, right? Rather than having to wait for permission. And so we actually, the process actually needs individual autonomy as well, okay? And this actually goes back to the, healthy individuation includes what? Connecting as well as separating. And you've run into this anytime you've joined a political group, like how do I support the group activity? Well, noticing when something's wrong and letting people know, it's a dance. Okay, so creating a space for that. Within this, then, you want to be tracking. You can't track everybody in the room, but you need to be doing some tracking of and watching of the quality of the room and how it's doing. So you'll notice that by yesterday, I was noticing a few things and naming at least some of them. The low energy in the room, the sense of we're not cohering quite. The group was feeling a little like not together, right? I was tracking all day that Maria Elena seemed to be a little unusually shut down. And by the end of the day, we finally had an opportunity for me to check in with that, right? You can't track everything and you can't be expected to touch base with everything. Again, you don't want to make it into a nursery school where you're having to take care of everybody's needs. That will drive you crazy. So I'm not recommending that. You want to be tracking enough for two reasons. One is to stay in rapport with the group, because if you're being like, oh, we're doing great here, what fun, yay! And the group, most of the group is going, this sucks, I'm having a really bad time. Then you're out of rapport with the group, right? And then the other thing is to sort of see things coming that you may need to address. And it may be as simple as, wow, this group is feeling a little like we're having a hard time connecting, and that's it. That's all you need to do. Or there may be somebody on the edge of their chair getting ready to explode, right? And all of this is just really useful for you and useful for the group, right? Tracking basically means, to give this is to be noticing the elephants. Right? We have this phrase, elephants in the room, right? Everyone knows that X is happening, but we're all acting like it isn't happening. And there's a certain amount of that has to happen in any group, right? But to the degree where there's too much of that going on, the group feels out of sync or out of congruence, or like it's doing a lot of pretend. And groups instinctively don't like that. You know, you go to Thanksgiving dinner and once again Uncle Joe is getting drunk and everyone's pretending like it isn't happening. I mean, it just drives everybody nuts. Yeah. Okay. And then within the context of your context, you want to think about your chunking. Okay? So this can have to do with your audience, amount of time, your limits and capacities, client resourcefulness, etc. Right? If you're doing a little taster, a Constellation taster, like you've been given room in a conference to do a Constellation taster, then you really want to think about the size thing you want to demo. Because if you have someone having a full-on step into their trauma thing and you've got 15 minutes to deal with it, right? So it's just chunking. Your audience, are they experienced representatives? Are they brand new to the work? How big is the room? How small is the number of people in the room? Your own limits and capacities. I'm feeling sick. I'm feeling great. There are issues I work really well with and other issues I have a harder time with. And how your client is doing with. And then you want to chunk up or down. Okay. How do you want to like keep it to smaller little exercises? You know, one of the things that ended up happening in Thailand, which is a happy effect, and I wish I could make this happen in the future, but I don't think I can, which was we had 4.5 days, and I essentially only had like 7 or 8 people. So I was doing like 2 people a day. Let me tell you, the effect of that relaxation, of being able to kind of full attention and not be in any hurry at all, had magical effects on the work. Like all the systems kind of kick back and say, have at it, Leslie, do what you want. Because there's going to be no force or push that's artificially coming through because of the time thing. You know? So all of those constellations just unfolded gorgeously. I've never had 7 or 8 in a row go that beautifully, dealing with really deep, hard, painful things. Some of it there are ones where I have to tell you, these clients were so brave in the way some of the constellations were revealing some of their own limitations and violations in their family. But there was room to have a lot of rapport with it. And it was just a kind of amazing work. But, you know, if I had 20 people in the same period of time, which would have been my goal, because then I would have made some money, right? There's always this balancing, right? Okay, so you want to chunk. And if I had 20 people, I would have to chunk the work differently. I would just have to, right? So this is kind of like beforehand or overview, things that you can do to sort of make this stuff work better. I'm going to say more about things you can do, but before I do that, I just want to sort of what we call symptoms of trauma. And you already know these things at a certain level, but in terms of being a facilitator, what will help you to notice? There's this thing in life, which you've maybe heard of by now, comes out of neurology and psychology, called regulation. The idea being that the child who grows up in a good environment, they have reactions to stuff, right? Mom goes away and they're terrified and they feel abandoned, and big noise happens. Mom gets sad one day and that's scary, you know, stuff happens, right? Even in good households, stuff happens. And with a good secured attachment parenting style, what the child learns how to do as they grow neurologically and their brain develops is to be able to what is called self-regulate, to soothe themselves when they get sad, to not get too despairing or too terrified when a noise goes off, to come back to baseline easily, yeah? To ask for help when they need help. You know, these are all self-regulating activities. It means that, you know, in terms of the baseline of life, you know, you go and you come back and you don't go too far off of your baseline. And then overall, I mean, you can see just how useful that would be generally in life for things like getting a job or finding a partner, or, you know, like if you have an interview that doesn't go well and you go like this about it, it's going to make it really hard to set yourself up for the next interview. But if you do this about it, then you recover and go to the next one. Now we have all of these, one of the newest topics, fads in self-help books is the joys of failure, right? This is a whole new hot thing that people are making money on. But this is the idea that you can have things happen and you can learn from them and you can come back to them and not make a lot of negative meaning about it, yeah? Because your sense of yourself and who you are in the world is pretty strong and pretty resilient, yeah? In households where the attachment process doesn't go so well, the child has a hard time self-regulating, and then that's called dysregulation. Okay? So this is the thing where you find yourself being jerked around by your emotions and kind of hijacked. Or you get in a space of feeling like just a terrible person for a week before you can get yourself back up. Or you're having a conflict with a friend and you feel like everything's going to end. You know, this sort of stuff. It goes in both directions. It goes in the hyper end. This is called the arousal, hyperarousal, or the hypoarousal. So the numbing out, the depression, the low affect, as they put it in psychology. Yeah. So you can have, doing this can be your style, doing this can be your style, or going back and forth can be your style. Yeah. And most of us don't dysregulate all the time. There's situations where we regulate really well and other situations where we dysregulate rather commonly. Places where we know ourselves is like, who here, this is a really good one for children of a certain trauma, is really good in a crisis. You can kind of keep your cool when everyone around you is losing their heads. Yeah. I'm one of those people who you want around if there's been an accident by the side of the road. Yeah. But I can lose my mind about a mistake at the cash register at the grocery store, right? This is like classic, right? Places where you can kind of keep your cool and places where you can't, okay? So what is really helpful in this work is being able to have an eye for your own client's dysregulation. Also for your own dysregulation and for the representative's dysregulations. But primarily we're looking at the client's dysregulation here, right? And in terms of your own, part of your fiduciary responsibility is continue to develop your own practices for how you help yourself get back into regulation. Yeah. Do you call up a friend? Do you meditate? Do you notice if you've gotten low blood sugar and get something to eat? Do you just take a break? Do you go for a walk around the block? Do you take a whole day off because you realize you haven't done that in a while? Okay. And in the moment, there's also those in the moment ones where like maybe you're in the middle of constellating and one of your own, you've gotten triggered somehow by something, you're getting a little dysregulated. What are your strategies for getting yourself back into regulation? For me, the movement is always, always, always to include what I'm experiencing. It's what Sarah Payton calls self-warmth. I'm having this experience. It's a human experience. That happens. Getting triggered is totally normal. Let's include that. I really had to train myself away from the try and push it away thing, because the what you resist persists thing is very, like the more you try to make yourself not dysregulated while you're constellating, the more you're probably going to reinforce the fact that you're dysregulated while you're constellating. So the shoving it aside. Now, some people can just say, you know what? I'm a professional. I'm going to bracket it for now and come back to it later. That's a perfectly fine move. I've done that. I've definitely said, you know what? Get your shit together. This is a perfectly valid reaction you're having right now, but it's not the time. Come back to it later. Your client needs you. And that can work for me. But in a spirit of what you call self-warmth, which I really like her stuff about self-warmth. It's really nice. Okay. So noticing your clients' dysregulations, going really up or down, no longer being resourceful. Maybe they're getting cranky with you. Maybe they're shutting down. What we want is people to be able to witness their pain without recrisising, without dysregulating. It's not too much. A little bit is okay. A little bit is okay. There is no benefit in losing people in dysregulation. Please don't do it. I have to underline this because I happen to come from a lineage and a tradition at NLP Marin, which would regularly trigger people into stuff, and then they'd spend all day in dysregulation. And then the next day they go home and they can't take care of their kids because their neurology needs so much recovery. Yeah, or they'd call in sick to work when actually they need that paycheck. Yeah, please don't do it. Please don't just leave people in their dysregulation. Now, if someone gets upset and they leave the workshop, there isn't a lot you can do about it. I understand. So there are limits to this. But having work there, again, there's certain just threads in the Bay Area of things where you go in and people are just dysregulating all day long. And I'm just watching the impact on their nervous systems and really worrying for them. Okay? This is not neutral. a little bit of it is fine. You're not going to do any damage. But if you do it for long enough, it means, again, you're sending the stress hormones into your body. And we all know the science of stress hormones. It sets up inflammatory processes. It actually has negative effects on the body. Right? We know that. So we can't be like, oh, everybody's having their process. There are no bad feelings, That's all true. That's all true. And okay. Some people's dysregulation is really subtle. That's their patterning, is to hide it, right? Yours was not blaring yesterday. And dysregulation is not exactly how I put it, but you were in a slightly dark place, and it was subtle. You weren't going around going, I'm sad. You weren't sobbing in corners, as far as I could tell. So it can be a little bit subtle, and we can get distracted because we have constellations to focus on. That's not fair. Not that we can get distracted, but we have multiple focuses, to be fair to ourselves. So this is another one of the myriad reasons why I encourage you to keep checking in with your clients and do it very explicitly, both at the level of just a glance. How is she doing? How is she doing? I was doing that with Lily. I was just like, you were like behind a representative over here, and I kept thinking, how's Lily doing? Well, she seems okay. She's getting teary-eyed, but I think she's okay. I wanted to check and see, but also quite literally once in a while say, how are you doing? Because some people don't show it very much physiologically, but then they'll say to you, I'm having a really hard time right now. Oh, what? I didn't know. Thank you for telling me. What's giving you such a hard time right now? Right? Okay. And then, if someone's gotten them really dysregulated or is going in that direction, help them re-regulate. Now, mostly that rapport stuff. Hey, how you doing? I'm having a really hard time. Oh, really? What's giving you a hard time? All that stuff, and then they get to share, and you say, oh, makes sense. Let's have moms take a step back. That's it. That's all it takes. It's that rapport moves. People like you to see them and acknowledge them and notice what they're going through. Again, it's that bit about trauma is in part defined or created via lack of accompaniment, lack of a community connection. More pages here than I thought. Yeah, so overwhelmed was unaccompanied, that got a stuck ending. If they're going through the constellation feeling unaccompanied by you, that can be a triggering experience, yeah? That was part of what you were experiencing, yeah? So just connecting and being in relationship and mirroring and acknowledging, yeah, okay? There are a bunch of other ones, and I'm not going to write them all down, but you can take notes. First off, touch. Touch can be very grounding. It can really get people back in their bodies, because one way to dysregulate is to dissociate or start to dissociate, kind of leave your body kind of thing. So touch can be really helpful. However, as you can imagine, first of all, just be small and modest about it, like a little thing on the shoulder or the upper arm. Generally speaking, avoid below the waist. Sometimes I'll touch on the knee or something, and every once I have to remind myself I probably shouldn't do that. Keep it up here, often on the back or on the shoulder is good. Or on the back of the hand, if they've got their hand here or something like that. Keep it small and modest. Generally speaking, calibrate their response. Do they move away? Do they do a bigger breath? Do they relax? And there are people, and I happen to be one of them. I use touch a lot, okay? But I'm also one of those people that if I'm dysregulated and you touch me, it may not be a good thing, because I've got some trauma around touch. right? So just be, calibrating. Did the person move away? Up until then, have they been welcoming touch in normal kinds of ways? Yeah. But touch can be, because touch is immediately, there's something, the neurology of touch is often quite grounding. It gets people back in their bodies. Okay. Don't indulge or encourage more dysregulation. So this is something I've seen. It's accidental, it's not intended, but someone's like crying, and crying is fine, by the way. Crying is not necessarily dysregulating. In fact, crying can be regulating in the correct situation, right? I think that was probably true for you last night. Yeah, your crying actually put you more in congruence with yourself. But if there's this kind of thing going on, that kind of thing, you're not going to want to actually go, well, that's so good, you're doing that, do more of that, right? Yeah. If there's a way in which people can kind of like start ramping themselves up. It's the seduction of the secondary emotions. This is another way in which that Ursa Frank article that I recommended in the email this week is so useful. How unuseful secondary emotions can be and how much they are chunked into trauma. You want to get people into primary emotions, and then you can encourage those. But if they're in primary emotions, please don't, encourage more of them. Secondary emotions, thank you. You can give them a resource. So let's say I'm the dysregulated client, you can say to me, and often what it'll be is something like, or something, I'm exaggerating a little bit, obvious. And I'll just say, can you just feel both your feet on the floor? Now this you have to be careful about, because sometimes this feels too vulnerable, right? This was keeping you safe. But, can you feel both feet? Just feel your feet on the ground floor. Let's just forget about what's going on in the constellation. They can wait. That's all right. You and me. Just feel your feet on the ground. Yeah. Feel your butt in the chair. Yeah. Take a couple of slightly deeper breaths. Yeah. And then you've probably got the person back a bit, right? Sometimes you got to help people a little bit. Yeah. If they're in a role, sometimes someone, you'll notice, oh my God, someone's not breathing anymore. Could you take a nice big breath for me? They obviously are breathing, otherwise they would have passed out. But they're barely breathing. Right? Okay. And you may have other. When I do one-on-one work, one thing that I happen to know about this is advanced stuff. You don't have to remember it unless you like to geek out to this sort of stuff. But one way in which dysregulation takes place is the two sides of the brain. This is from above. This is the top of the head. Generally, there's this communication between the two sides of the brain to just do what you got to do in life. In dysregulation, this communication stops. So if you can get the client to do something that's cross-hemispheric, as they say, this can often be re-regulating. So there's a couple of, anything that's both sides of the body, right? Say, after this, I want you to go out and just take a walk, right? Walking is classic cross-hemispheric. As an experiment, everybody in the room, just cross your legs in the way you normally do. I'm going to fix this. Just the way you normally do it. And then take your hands and do that. Now, what I want you to do is cross the legs the other way and do the thumbs the other way. Actually, the whole hand the other way. And notice what happens in your body. And just go back and forth a few times. This is, now, none of you are really dysregulated right now, but there's a way in which this gets both sides back online. And sometimes if I'm working with someone and I notice they've gotten a little like They've gotten themselves a little agitated. So let's just take a pause for a moment and just do this for a minute. And they're like, this is silly. And I'm like, it's totally silly. But even the silliness of it is re-regulating.
Donna Eden has an exercise for that.
Donna Eden, she did the whole book on these things, right? I think.
She's very energy conscious.
Yeah.
It's, you stand up and you go like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
There's a whole,
effective.
I think she's the one who's got a whole book on right-left exercises. They're actually really, if you identify as someone who sometimes has a hard time regulating yourself, they're good exercises to do. Okay. Don't try to force them to get over it. You need to calm yourself down now. Smack them. But we're not usually like that. It's usually more subtle than that. We want them to enjoy the experience of becoming their adult resource selves again, not feel shamed into it, right? And feel their power in the face of their pain. And then when they get there, mirror them again as they resource themselves. Good, well done. See, you're looking good now. Yeah? And then one complicating note, I will just say, some people are just kind of stylistically high-strung and high energy, or just really different with their energy than you are. And it's not necessarily dysregulation. So just kind of be on the lookout for that, right? Like, whoa, this person comes on a bit like a first freight train compared to my way of going through life, right? So you just notice that. Okay. So having said that, there's something here I wanted to go back to. What was it? Oh, yeah. Just in terms of back here, that's basically all of it. I've already talked about the Constellation stuff around the questions you have about then strategy. What do you set up? This is a really traumatized system. Okay. What am I going to set up? Okay. And this whole conversation about where you start. Okay. Sometimes for someone who's really high trauma energy, and you notice, holy shit, there's this really traumatized part of the family. And there's these other parts that aren't as traumatized. You might start over here. You know? You might give them an experience of success of being able to connect with their ancestors. Right? One second. There's something about this I wanted to say. What was it? Oh, right. There are some other things that I also do as strategies in here, which again, you guys have seen me do when I've interviewed someone and I'm like, holy shitolies, this person is ready to pop, right? Or there's a lot of trauma in the system that's showing up. I was talking yesterday about at one time I just had it, all the people in the circle say, you have a role until I give you a formal other role, which is you're going to represent a source of safety in this family system. So I was starting out with a really nice energetic container of safety. Remember another time I had a very, very traumatized element in the system. What was coming through, we don't know if this is literal or metaphorical, but a child who had been murdered by somebody in the family in quite a grisly fashion. So we had the child and the perpetrator, and we were doing all the normal stuff here, and it wasn't working. So I just finally got 6 people or 8 people or whatever and had them, I just recognized. So our goal here, right, is to integrate, honor, and include, right? That's our goal. I hit the point of realizing the family can't. It can't. I've done all my jujitsu here. It can't hold and see this. And I needed to give them a break on holding and seeing this, but that having it not seen and held is intolerable. So I just brought in 8 or whatever it was to say, you are something that can and has the task of seeing this. Maybe divine elements or something, guardian angels of the family. I didn't really define it very much. If I know the client's metaphysical system, religious system, I'll pull it from their religious system. You know, if they're Catholics, I'll make it, a whole bunch of guardian angels or something like that, right? If they're Jewish, it'll be seraphim or something. But the minute I brought this in, I had a constellation I could work with. Because now the members of the family got off the hook on how to see and include and honor something they could not see, honor, and include. And the lost child felt really good about having something that could. And then we had something we could work with. So just noticing where there's like these obstacles because the trauma injury is so intense that sometimes, and you need to think creatively about what might be a useful frame for that, without it merely being bypassing, which is what I talked about yesterday, like ignoring the real issue. We wouldn't want this to become some kind of replacement for acknowledging what the importance of these events. Yeah. One other thing, I know you've got a question that I just don't want to lose. In the space of the shared culture, for me, I generally ask or encourage not too much noise, fast action, God forbid throwing of objects, things like that. It sometimes requires some retraining. There are constellation spaces where people will like run across the room and maybe knock something over as they do it. We're pounding on the floor and yelling. And we understand these movements and noises arise authentically from the roles, right? God knows screaming in the face of a lot of things these systems have dealt with is perfectly appropriate. But those things tend to be really hard for the client. And for the system generally. It helps, it makes it hard for them to stay in regulation. So by and large, you have to be careful because you don't want to say, we're not going to have any feelings around here, right? But I want to keep it within tolerance levels, particularly if I'm guessing that we're in a bit of a slightly traumatized space here. Okay, you had a question.
Back on the approach up or down. Yeah. Do you discuss that with the client beforehand?
Sometimes.
Because, it could have, it could imply multiple sessions. It could.
Absolutely.
It could feel like, well, what do I care about? That's not my problem,
Rarely get that. Once I've interviewed that I don't usually get that, but it does imply there might be more sessions. And I'm usually very honest with people about my impression about this issue you've got. I think it's a one constellation issue. And I think we can really get somewhere on it. And it may kick up other things and you might want a constellation about something completely separate down the road. Or if they're talking about lifelong depression or this massive interrupted reach that's making everything in life hard, I'm going to be really honest. We probably want to consider some ongoing work, which wouldn't only be a constellation, but some of the one-on-one work as well. Yes.
You don't usually, if somebody, whatever they're going through, they kind of may relate to the parent, the work between them and their parent, but if you say, well, let's work on your great grandparents, they don't typically say, oh, well, why do you want to focus on that?
No, I don't usually get that. Most of the people who come to me are coming to me because they have some guess that their troubles have something to do up the lineage. So even if they have a lot of focus on their parents, they usually have some ancestral frame. That's how they got referred to me in the first place, right? That's not always the case, but it's commonly enough the case that that's how people come to me. Some people are coming to me specifically about a childhood trauma or the impression of a childhood trauma. And when I'm doing the interview, they get, by the way, kind of a questionnaire for me. Anywhere in your family tree, are there suicides? Are there murders? Is there war? So they're already thinking ancestrally, even if they're focused on the childhood trauma. So that as I'm hearing about, a great uncle who committed suicide and, an uncle who was lost in the war and blah, 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 they're already beginning to notice and it's not unique to constellations, that, their problems may be related. And the problems with their parents are related to things that even preceded their parents, right? And as we're talking, I will literally, so father was just a nut job. He was just really, really dangerous and difficult. I will say, what the heck happened to your dad in childhood? I just presuppose that they get that question, right? That people don't come preloaded to be abusive fathers. That something is, relevant to that. And they'll just, so that I'm continuing to build a framework for this, that they're giving me assent to. And then at some point I might say something like, given how hard things were with your father, and how damaged he seemed to be by the time he was your father, do you think it would be helpful for us to look at these conditions before your father, so that perhaps it can be, you can have something that feels better with your father? And they're like, thumbs up on that. Because they've probably done the therapeutic talking about their father thing, and it still doesn't feel better. That's probably why they're coming to me, generally speaking, right? And I will share a story that was actually really relevant to this not so long ago. I was talking with a client with a spectacularly difficult father, and most of the conversation was about that. And she was doing a lot of dysregulation. She was worried about the constellation and how it was going to go. And I was presupposing we were going to focus on the father because she was presupposing it. So we were talking about how we're going to work with it, and she was just getting more and more. And I just finally said to her, and I was just, because every once in a while I just say, I just need to stop and step into this. Clients usually like that. I just, you know what, I'm just having an idea. Let me know what you think. What if your father is not in this constellation at all? And I was on the phone, but I could hear the tears coming into her eyes. And she said, is that even possible? Because the whole thing has to be with her and her father. That's the story. And I'm like, yeah, and I think it might be a really good thing for you just to be a little separated from your father a little bit and be able to feel your family without him for a bit. I mean, it's not permanent. We would get back to him somewhere down the road, but what do you think? She's like, I would really love that. I would really, really love that. Okay, we got something that we can move into, that we're not rocking her safety system so intensely that she can barely stay on the boat. Yeah. So it's all in dialogue. It's all in conversation. I'm not delivering it this way to them, right? And it's going to make sense to them.
So where did you take that constellation?
I don't remember.
Father,
I don't remember.
not in the picture, and he's the main problem.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm sure we dealt with some pre-father trauma on his lineage side. But I'm sorry, I do not have those details accessible. I just remember that interaction. So, some thoughts and ideas about how to work with this stuff with people. Yeah. Yeah. Questions or thoughts? We're about to move into a break, I think. Comments, your own, like, is this making you think about your own stuff at all? What's coming up for people?
I just remember working with a guy whose father, I've mentioned him several times, whose father, in his view, tried to kill him multiple times. And when I didn't have the benefit of this knowledge, but I did ask him something about his grandfather, and he said, "Oh, well, he was a piece of work. I mean, compared to Dad, he was like off the rails."
Right.
So,
which is a usually useful reframe right there. Oh my God, my dad was not as bad as he could have been.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of going in the direction of, well, Dad didn't have, the ability to give you or to deal with you in a constructive way, and that's kind of where that came up.
Yeah. And so you can imagine, and I don't know what I would do in that situation. I'd need an interview, but just to make up a story, how useful it would be to deal with whatever got his grandfather so off the rails, resource him, and then give his father an experience of being resourced by his father. And then a changed experience for your client is going to be almost automatic, because now he's in the presence of a kind of a father resonance that's safer. Right?
Yeah.
And you're almost not going to have to do much here. It's just have him be in the presence of the better resourced father, who's better resourced because he's in the presence of the better. Now, this was something I thought of yesterday and I didn't say. How far do we go? Do we have to go all the way to Adam and Eve? This is where I always say that it's turtles all the way down, right? You've heard that myth, right? Someone says if North America's a turtle, what is the turtle on? And the elder says, you don't understand, it's turtles all the way down. It's turtles all the way down in a way. Sometimes a splashy event like war sets off these things. And that's ideally what you're looking for. And then you'll deal with that. And that'll be max 3 generations back. It's really rare when the focus of my constellations is pre-great-grandparent in terms of specific individuals, right? Which is usually about as far back as people have stories anyway, right? However, there's often a sense like alcoholism, incest, depression. There's certain things where you start to look into them lineagely and you just cannot find the origin point. It just seems to be kind of forever. Yeah. And then you've got to figure out where are you going to enter the stream, right? Yeah. Sometimes like I'll put in a parent and then just, this is where you see me put in something like, if it's let's just say alcoholism, the original alcoholic, right?
Alcoholic 0.
Yeah, alcoholic. Yeah. And then this is the one either literally or mythologically, right? Because we're in an archetypal space here at this point. We shouldn't take it too literally, right? But what the original injury was. And then as this one gets the acknowledgement that they needed, whatever it was, then perhaps they interact with the grandparent or even the parent, or sometimes directly to the client, depending upon what you want to deal with. So finding some sort of archetypal origin to interact with. I've just had that. I've looked at someone's tree and they've told me everything, and I see some traumas, but I can't feel it. I can't feel where the entanglement really is. So I'll just start doing stuff like this. Other questions or comments? Send you off into a break. Let me send you off into a break. Quarter of.